21st, 2019 edition of the Sustainable Materials Management Web Academy. State and local organics bans, implementation planning, lessons learned, and updates. EPA is happy to have you participating. This 60-minute webinar is hosted by the Environmental Protection Agency to provide training and networking opportunity to state, local governments, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders interested in sustainable materials management. The state of Vermont and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts both implemented regulations in 2014 to promote food recovery and to decrease the disposal of food scraps in the municipal solid waste stream. Metro, the regional government for Portland, Oregon metropolitan area, recently adopted a policy that requires food-generating businesses to separate food scraps from their garbage. The new code requires the largest food service businesses to separate their food scraps and other garbage starting in 2020, and other smaller businesses will be phased in the next few years. So, in the 6 years that the bans have been passed in the state of Massachusetts and Vermont, what's the progress that's been made, including jobs created, food recovery infrastructure, and takeaways from their programs? And how is Metro prepared for the implementation date? What metrics are they using to drive the food scrap recovery? This webinar will feature presenters from state and local government who are in the forefront of organics recovery policy in both the state and local level. First, we'll start with Holly Sternkorb. Holly is with Metro and a senior solid waste planner for the regional government in Portland, Oregon metropolitan area. Josh Kelly is the section chief for the materials management section with Vermont's Department of Environmental Conservation. And John Fisher is the branch chief of the commercial waste reduction and waste planning at Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. As George mentioned, we will take 1 or 2 burning questions after each presentation, and we'll have a longer Q&A session at the conclusion of all 3 presentations. Please type your questions throughout the webinar. Moving into today's webinar, please note our disclaimer, and now to our speakers. I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Holly Sternkorb from Metro, and Holly's going to take over the presentation, and we'll go from there. Holly, you're up.
Good morning. This is Holly from Metro. Metro is the regional government in the Portland, Oregon area. Today I'm going to give a brief overview of our recently adopted food scraps policy, but mainly I'll focus on the information we gathered and the systems we put in place to estimate food scraps generation and recovery tons for planning and evaluation. This information allowed us to identify who to include in the program and when, determine what type of collection, transfer, and processing infrastructure would be needed, track and monitor compliance with the requirement, evaluate our progress towards meeting program goals, and inform program improvement. I'll finish with information on how we will fill gaps to verify and refine some of our base planning assumptions. But first of all, what is Metro? Metro is the directly elected regional government that oversees issues of regional concern in the Portland, Oregon metropolitan area. These include land use and transportation planning, solid waste, parks and open spaces, performing arts venues, and the Oregon Zoo. The Metro region is comprised of 3 counties and 24 cities with a population of 1.6 million people. Here is an abridged movie poster version of our long history of work on reducing and recovering food scraps in the Metro region. Starting with the good, the bad, and the ugly, we have made some progress over the 20 years, and we have been working on this for 20 years, to establish a stable, sustainable system for processing food scraps. But we've also had some setbacks, some good, some bad, and some ugly. We focused on food scraps in the region for a number of reasons, and per the reference to Top Dog, per the reference to Top Dog, one reason is that food has been identified in both the state and regional waste plan as a high priority material. Despite achieving a 48% recovery rate in our region, we are projected to send more than 1.3 million tons of garbage to landfill next year. A full 20% of that material is food waste, the largest single component of our waste stream. More importantly, reducing food waste conserves natural resources and reduces greenhouse gas emissions. Last July, on the big night, well, actually it was in the afternoon, the Metro Council adopted an ordinance requiring local jurisdictions to adopt mandatory commercial food scraps collection programs by July 2019 and begin implementation in March of 2020. In order to craft the policy, I'm not able to advance my slide. I'm not sure what happened.
Just click anywhere on the screen, and then you should be able to.
Oh, okay. There we go. Sorry about that. In order to craft the ordinance that was adopted by Metro Council, we put together an intergovernmental team to collaboratively develop the policy and rules to reflect the interests and needs at the local level. Again, we've got 3 counties and 24 cities in the region. The team continues to work together to prepare the implementation and measurement plan. The entire process of stakeholder engagement and policy development took well over 3 years. Another part of this policy package is a resolution that directs staff to develop a business food scraps disposal prohibition for consideration in December 2019. So we're looking at both required collection and a disposal ban. I also want to emphasize here that food waste prevention and donation are still and always will be our highest priority. To support this priority, the policy also requires that businesses are offered education and technical assistance with food waste prevention as well as edible food donation. A little later in the presentation, I'll talk about how we plan to track and measure both prevention and donation activities. The policy affects about 3,300 businesses, such as large grocery stores, restaurants, hospitals, university and corporate cafeterias, hotels, and schools. This subset of business types is responsible for the vast majority of commercial food scraps currently being sent to landfill. The policy is phased in over 5 years and will begin in 2020, starting with the largest food service businesses. So all that planning work and where we are today had to be based on something. After all, we're planners, and planners want data to understand what's really going on and how we can better manage our systems. To do this work, we needed some information. We needed information to understand how much food waste was generated by each business type. This information has helped us do everything from to plan the programs, decide who we're going to phase in and when, and also determine the potential impacts on existing collection and transfer system. To develop this information, we did what any good planners would do. We cooked up some numbers. Here at Metro, we collect a lot of data, but we did not have information on food generating businesses at the level of detail needed. We started by looking at what others have done, and I want to note here, there are a number of really great tools to estimate the quantity of food generated by businesses. These include the EPA's Excess Food Opportunities Map and Massachusetts Recycling Works Food Waste Estimation Guide, just to name a few of the tools that are out there. After reviewing these tools, we decided to develop our own method. We needed a method that was based on information that was easily and readily available to all of our local government partners in order to identify businesses in the region that would be subject to the requirement and ensure consistent estimates across the region on an ongoing basis. Our recipe: there are 3 main ingredients, including the North America Industry Classification System, the NICS codes, quarterly Census of Employment and Wages data, the QCEW data, and tons per employee per year factors, TPEPI. I'll explain what each of these is in a minute. The point I want to make here is that we selected these data sources and assumptions because they were all readily available from federal and state sources. Because of this, any government agency and our local governments can use this same methodology to identify food generating businesses in their area and estimate food waste generation by business type to help plan their programs. Now I'll explain how we combine these ingredients to yield our food waste generation estimates. First, we needed to identify food generating businesses in the region to target for the program. To do this, we used the North American Industry Classification System, or the NICS. This is a standard used by federal statistical agencies to classify businesses to report on the economy. The U.S. Census Bureau assigns 1 NICS code to each establishment based on its primary activity. Metro identified 6 main NICS classifications that represent businesses that generate large quantities of food scraps. They're on the screen, including accommodations, education, food service, grocery, healthcare, and other. The other category includes correctional facilities and food and beverage manufacturing processors. Each of these classifications was further grouped. We can refine these groups. Once we had these NICS codes, we needed to apply the information to our local business community. To do this, we use state employment data to determine the number of businesses in the region of a certain NICS classification. This state data is called the QCEW, which stands for Quarterly Census of Employment and Wages. It's a quarterly count of employment and wages reported by employers covering more than 95% of U.S. jobs and is available at the county, state, and national level by industry. This data includes a wealth of business-specific information such as NICS code, business name, address, and total number of employees. The total number of employees is an important data point for our analysis, which I'll explain in a minute. This matchup between our NICS codes and the QCEW data provided us with a list of businesses in the region to target for the program, so the specific businesses. Currently, we're targeting, as I said, over 3,300 businesses. Next we needed to estimate the quantity of food scraps for each business generated. To do this, we added some ingredients from CalRecycle to our recipe. CalRecycle is the California Department of Resources Recycling and Recovery. Since 1999, California has been doing comprehensive sector-specific waste characterization studies. These generation rates are determined on a ton per employee per year basis by business type. Our acronym for this factor is the TPEPI. This information was a great match for our food program planning needs. The factors allowed us to use information from the QCEW data, the number of employees, to estimate generation. So if we know how many people work at a particular business, we can estimate the quantity of food scraps generated. Of course, it's not a straight line. We have made adjustments, including total employees to FTE, adjusting generation rates for certain sectors based on local knowledge, and reviewing business types included in each sector. I don't have time to get into the details about all these adjustments, but would be happy to follow up later. We were pretty confident that our overall tonnage generation estimates were solid when that total estimate that we calculated based on this methodology closely mirrored the actual food waste disposed by our commercial sector. So using these three base data sets with adjustments is how we arrived at the food waste generation estimates by business type. This informs the program design and provides the basis for setting benchmarks and helps to determine the transfer and processing capacity needed in the region. These estimates are not perfect by any means. Local knowledge is critical, especially in refining our list of businesses. We rely on our local governments to help us check and verify those businesses. We've created the first list and then we've provided it to the local government, and they're comparing it to local data sources such as business license information, food handler certification, and also doing field verification. Again, as I said, there are a variety of tools and methodologies to estimate food generation by business type. This particular method, based on the California data and number of employees, works the best for us because we needed that one common variable that was easily accessible to all of our local government partners, and that was the number of employees. So as I noted, back to my movie theme, we will be using this data for evaluation as well as program planning. Now I'll describe how we will evaluate to get it straight using data to reach our goals. For the food scraps evaluation system that we're setting up, this database, will be used to provide compliance monitoring, performance monitoring, and evaluation of the effectiveness of the policy in the program. I'll walk through this next. In addition, Metro will use the data to inform the need for a food scraps disposal ban. For compliance, we landed on two observable indicators that indicates a business compliance with the requirement. The first indicator is the presence of correctly labeled and easily identifiable collection containers. Adequate collection service. The second is that adequate collection service is provided, including appropriately sized containers and sufficient collection frequency. For all jurisdictions, compliance will be determined based on the judgment of a city or county technical assistance staff during a site visit. So they'll actually go and visit all of the businesses on that list of 3,300 businesses. Site visits will be conducted at 100% of the non-participating businesses, and spot checks are made at 20% of participating businesses to ensure that the required conditions are met by the end of the implementation period. For performance, that's based on tons recovered. We knew, of course, that we were not going to get 100% of the food scraps that are generated, so we looked at a range of separation efficiencies. We looked at 30%, 50%, 70%. We settled on 50% or 59,000 tons. That's our goal for the program, is to recover 59,000 tons of food scraps. The actual tons recovered will be compared to our estimates to gauge progress towards meeting the goal, and will serve as a means of evaluating program effectiveness and help identify areas of improvement. It's important to note that performance is not an indicator of compliance for our program. Local governments will not be required to meet a recovery goal. The tons recovered and progress towards meeting recovery projections are an indicator being used to evaluate the effectiveness of the policy. So to evaluate the program, we created our food scraps evaluation database, and that consists of that list of businesses that we generated based on the methodology I described earlier. This database calculates the estimated quantity of food waste generated by each business and assigns it to a compliance group. And then this list is shared with local governments who use it to determine and report on compliance. Local governments will also update the list on a continual basis to reflect changes in the field. We'll also be collecting information on donation and prevention. Donation information will include whether or not a business is donating and who they're donating to. We are also partnered with our local food donation agencies to capture data on quantities donated. Prevention information will include whether or not a business has adopted a specific prevention practice, such as measuring how much and where food is wasted, adopting practices to reduce overproduction, or repurposing food. Over time, this database will help us get a clearer picture of total generation and allow us to track the impacts of waste prevention and donation programs. During the 5-year implementation period for the food waste program, local governments will submit quarterly reports on business-specific activities to facilitate timely adjustments to support meeting the compliance schedule. Metro will analyze the data from the region and produce a dashboard report showing program implementation progress, waste prevention and donation measures, businesses in compliance by hauler franchise area, and a variety of other indicators. The example here is a draft of what the regional dashboard might look like. And again, this information will allow us to track our progress towards meeting our goals and determine where we need to make improvements. This is another example of reports the database will provide. It's a map of the region with the location of each business subject to the requirement. If you click on the dot, it'll pull up a specific business-specific information, such as the name, address, and compliance status, along with tons generated, and again, and a variety of other information. The information we built into the database will also allow us to calculate many other things important to our program planning and implementation, such as distance to transfer service, estimated tons that may flow through our transfer system, and a variety of other indicators. The final chapter in our saga is about refinement to improve our assumptions. We will be conducting this spring a food service sector characterization study to accomplish 2 goals. One is to verify program planning data, specifically the tons per employee per year factor, that TPEPI factor for restaurants. The second is to set benchmarks for separation, efficiency, contamination rates, and total generation for food scraps generated by businesses. Why are we doing this? Restaurants represent 60% of the total quantity of food scraps generated by businesses affected by the policy. This sector is the one, and the sector is the one we have the least confidence in our TPEPI factor. The current data does not provide per employee generation rates by service type, full service, limited service, catering, and we feel this is a significant data gap because we don't think that a full service sit-down restaurant has the same food waste generation as a fast food restaurant, yet we're currently using the same rate. So this waste characterization study will help us refine that base assumption as well as set benchmarks. There is a lot more information in all this work, but I would like to stop here to allow my other speakers. I'm excited to hear their presentations. Thank you very much for your time, and please feel free to contact me with any questions.
Great, thank you, Holly. I'll just have 1 or 2 quick questions for you. You mentioned that there's 3,300 establishments and you'll be conducting site visits. How many people are on your staff or working with you on this project?
So as I said, there are 24 cities and 3 counties, so this is very much a cooperative and collaborative effort. So each of those, each of the counties and cities have staff. Metro provides grant funding to help support the implementation of the program. So for example, Washington County has a cooperative program and they have a staff of people that will be going out to visit businesses. City of Portland has the same, Clackamas County. So they're local government waste reduction specialists. And the total, it's 12 to 15 people total.
Great. And then just one other question along those lines. How will tons recovered be observed? Is that also reported by those types of entities?
No, we've got a pretty robust data collection system here. So Metro has authority over disposal. So we're tracking tons that come in through our transfer stations, and commercial food waste is separate from all other materials. So we're able to track the weights as they come through the stations. We also use retrack. So the haulers also report in, so that's also where we get that those actual recovery tons.
Great, thank you so much. So George, I'd like to tee up our second speaker, Josh Kelly from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. Josh, you're up.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks so much, folks, for tuning in to this webinar. I work for the Department of Environmental Conservation within the Agency of Natural Resources at the state of Vermont. And what you're looking at are some symbols, the blue chasing arrow symbols you're very familiar with, and the two others that we created during the passage of, or right after the passage of Vermont's universal recycling law that really focuses in on making recycling a common occurrence and really moving the state towards diversion or separation of food scraps and reduction of food scraps, as the previous speaker mentioned. So these symbols are available on our website. Anyone can use them and download them. They're open source, and they're really meant to try and move us towards a 3-bin future. And as you'll hear, there's really not a need to be putting food scraps in the trash. There's a lot of other things we can do with them. So a couple of points before we begin. In whether you have a ban or considering a ban, I just want everyone to know that within your region, preventing food waste can happen regardless of a ban. And there is some amount of food rescue, probably a good amount, already going on in your region, as well as separation or recycling of food processing byproducts through animal feed or via the rendering industry, which is one of the oldest food scrap recycling industries around. So there's a lot of stuff happening underneath people's noses that they may not be aware of, and there's a lot of opportunity to be seized there. And then lastly, I think consumers are becoming much more aware and concerned about food waste, and those businesses that are reducing it or looking at ways of diverting that which they can't reduce, coffee grounds, things like that. So it's definitely becoming more widespread. So I keep this slide, this photo in here because people often ask me, well, why do we care? I mean, doesn't the food waste break down the landfill? These carrots were landfilled for over 10 years, and you can see how they've sort of gone through a mummification process. It simply is not an effective way to manage these resources. Organic material, food scraps in particular, break down extremely slowly and produce methane gas when they are disposed in a landfill, and they're never able to be used for anything else. And the sad truth is that probably these carrots could have been eaten at some point by someone else. The amount of food that is wasted that's edible would shock most people if they saw what is disposed of. So there's just higher and better uses for it. Like many states, Vermont does a waste composition study where we look at what's in the trash approximately every 5 years and look at what materials are being thrown out. And that gives us a direction to go in as what to prioritize. So the beginning of our law really focused on the state not meeting its goals in terms of recycling and composting and diverting waste. As you can see in our 2013 study, the amount of organic material is the biggest portion of the waste stream, and then there was still a good amount of recyclables that could be separated out. So we feel like almost half of what we were disposing of could have been recycled in some way, shape, or form, either through composting, through donation, through recycling. So in 2012, the state passed the universal recycling law unanimously. And again, as you'll see, it really focused on composting and recycling and really reducing food waste and making recycling something that everybody does in the state. This is a really simple table that it tries to summarize a 50-page law in one succinct way. So if you look at the materials on the left, those materials are banned from disposal in landfills by certain dates. And then what's unique about Vermont's law is it also requires facilities that collect trash and haulers that collect trash to offer collection for these banned materials by certain dates. So often before or the same time that something is banned, there's a collection requirement by facilities and or haulers. Now there's not a collection requirement anymore for haulers on leaf and yard debris. There's been some reasonable changes that have been made to the law since it first came into play, and the food scrap collection requirement for haulers has been changed several times. It was originally supposed to be in 2017. So the bottom line that's in yellow are the dates for food scraps, and you can see that facilities were required to offer collection of food scraps in 2017, haulers are 2020, and then there's a phase-in on the landfill ban, which is really described well on this next slide. So any food scrap generator that produces more than these thresholds that you see below and is within 20 miles of a facility must separate them according to the law. So in 2014, we started with generators that produce more than 104 tons per year, which, if you're wondering where that number comes from, it's essentially 2 tons per week. This was modeled after Connecticut's legislation, who also has a 1 and 2 ton ban on organics. And our 20-mile provision also copied Connecticut to say, if a facility locates in an area, any business or person that's producing more than this amount of material must separate that material. And in 2020, as you can see in Vermont's law, it just takes it much further. All food scraps are banned regardless of distance. So I just want to flag there, that seems like a lot to undertake, and it's a big amount of change. A full ban on food scraps is something that people have their own reactions to, and I completely get it. As the last speaker said, there's expectations or guesses as to how much will actually be left in the waste stream or how much we will actually be capturing and separating out from it. We've guessed through a study that was done by by a contractor that about 60% of the food scraps and other organics would be captured as through this law. That's sort of the best guess. And we think that's actually a significant amount of progress from where we are currently, and where we've been in the past. But the law also has a lot of built-in flexibility. For example, haulers and facilities can apply for exemptions to those requirements that I was listing before, the collection requirements. Residents that home compost can throw out meat and bones even after 2020. They can dispose of them in trash. And businesses and institutions that have a composting or a separation program can request a de minimis designation. So essentially, they can dispose of some material as long as they have a system in place for the majority of their material. So a restaurant gets busy. We're not chasing down every single apple core. And let's say a food manufacturing facility has 1 ounce product that is off spec, that's really hard to depackage and separate out. So there's definitely some reason built into it. The legislation that Vermont passed also put in place a hierarchy, which you're probably very familiar with the EPA's hierarchy. It's very similar. It goes through reduction at the source, food for people, like food rescue, food donation. We even created this symbol, the purple apple, for to represent food rescue and food donation. Food for animals, and then composting and anaerobic digestion. So from the highest to the least preferable use for these materials. Lastly is energy recovery. This hierarchy actually also applies to our clean wood ban, and that's where energy recovery comes in with the sort of burning of wood for fuel, for heat, for power. And so far, it's working. It's working really well. We have hundreds of businesses that are composting. Food donation is more than doubled since the law went into effect, in part from the law, but also due to our partners at the Vermont Food Bank and their network of food shelves and grocery stores that have really worked well together. Food scrap haulers have nearly doubled since the law was passed. And one of our recent waste composition studies found that 40% of residential food waste is currently being separated for composting or be given to animals. So generally for Vermonters, many of them are already doing this practice. And we find that our facilities are composting more than ever. Our data just year over year keeps increasing. And we put together this infographic, one pager, to sort of capture some of that, to really answer the question of why. Why is keeping food waste out of the landfill a benefit? First of all, our food donation and food rescue numbers are just phenomenal, and we really credit the Vermont Food Bank and their partners for this fresh rescue program that they have, where we have Salvation Army food shelf that's getting meat and vegetables and produce and dairy products because they're going direct to the grocery store and picking up directly. It's really revolutionized things for people in need. And then we've talked about greenhouse gas emissions. We run a calculation using EPA's WARM model based on the tons of food scraps Vermont disposes every year. You can run these calculations really easily. You can put in different parameters versus landfilling. And in short, if we were to compost all of Vermont's food waste, it would be the same as not driving over 3,000 times around the earth. So it's pretty significant impact. This is a map of Vermont's commercial food scrap collection services. So the towns that are in dark orange or sort of a dark beige are currently being offered commercial food scrap collection services. And this map has been much more speckled in the past than it is today. Like I mentioned, we have over a doubling in food scrap haulers, and the facilities that are numbered here are the 13 certified facilities that operate all across the state that collect food scraps and other organic materials really 365 days a year. Most of them are composting facilities, and roughly 85% of Vermont's towns are within 20 miles of these facilities. Some of these facilities are new, some were there before the law went into effect, and some facilities have gone out of business during this phase in time. There's been an evolution process going on, but many of them have seen much more material coming in and have expanded their operations to meet that demand. This is one of those facilities. I just like to take the time to show a picture of what a facility looks like. As I said, most of our processing capacity is composting currently. We have a new digester company coming into the state starting to haul for digestion as well. And then on the residential drop-off side for our transfer stations, Vermont's a pretty rural state. We have transfer stations represented by these little green with black circle dots all over this map. Over 100 transfer stations are collecting food scraps as required by law, and that means that within 10 miles, that's the light blue color, within 10 miles of pretty much every town in Vermont, they have access to a food scrap drop-off location. In addition, we have some growing residential curbside services. It's slow to grow. We're finding that some towns are a little ahead of the curve and others are a little behind. But we're seeing more and more businesses starting up and trying to expand services to serve residents at their homes. This is kind of just what it looks like with drop-off in Vermont. People have these kitchen countertop black pails, and then they have the buckets. They fill the bucket, they bring it to a transfer station, and then this is one of our solid waste districts that is emptying some of the bins that are at the transfer station at their compost facility. Like Oregon, and Metro, we've spent a lot of time with data, and we produced around 2014 the Vermont Materials Management Map, which you see these little red forks. These teardrop-shaped forks are all the businesses, schools, institutions that produce food waste. So again, those grocery stores, those correctional facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, food, restaurants, cafes, dining halls, you name it. We've looked at the data. And then we overlaid that with our food shelves. You can see some purple apples located there representing the food shelves, our transfer stations, which are the recycling symbols, and then our composting locations, which are those apple core, green apple core locations. Each one of these is clickable and brings up a short estimate as to what the business is and what they might produce in terms of food waste. It's a complete estimate. I say that 3 times every time because the data is only good as the data you're able to collect. And we'll talk a little bit about where our data came from for this map. And this is where it came from. We've used data available from nursing homes and our correctional facilities and hospitals to get the number of beds. And we currently use about ½ pound per meal, which depending on the meal is a conservative estimate. It's trying to capture both what is pre-consumer and post-consumer food waste. That would include the coffee grounds, that would include the eggshells, that would include the steak bones, that would include the half-eaten hamburger. So we multiply the number of beds times the number of meals, and because we don't know how many meals they serve at this hospital or nursing facility, we just do it by 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. So these estimates can be high estimates in some cases, in other cases they're low estimates. We have a whole sheet on this which you can download from the map on how we come up with these calculations. In Vermont, we had a really good partnership with our Department of Health that does inspections of food establishments across the state, and they collect seating data. So if you have a Department of Health, that data may be available to you. You heard what Metro had done. Really, you have to look for the data sources that are easily accessible and then try and make calculations based on that to estimate how much food scraps you might be collecting. There's a lot of chicken and egg that goes on when a state or region looks at food scraps, and I would just suggest that really you don't get too overwhelmed by the data. It's imperfect. It's always imperfect. But I do think that there's so much opportunity just in talking with your food rescue organizations, your Department of Health, about opportunities for reducing and diverting food and food waste from the waste stream. So we have a 20-mile radius tool in this map that shows a generator if they're within 20 miles of a facility, and it even connects to a Google Maps mapping thing so they can find out how to drive there, how to reach there. And the EPA even built their excess food opportunities map in some ways based on some of the basic methodologies that Vermont had employed as well. It's a good tool. It's worth checking out if you haven't spent any time with it. And then this is, again, pictures of restaurants with buckets and the rolling carts out back. This is really how food scraps are getting separated in Vermont, and really effectively so. We provide posters. These posters are downloadable on our website. They're a little hard to find, but contact me if you want, and I'll direct you or send you a link to them for our state offices and use them in our business outreach. Really, they're meant to simply show the future, make it clear and consistent how to separate recycling, food scraps, and then what's left over as trash. We've been conducting direct business outreach similar to Oregon Metro with our businesses. We're trying to hit the major population centers in Vermont by 2020. And part of it is to educate them on the law and options available to them, and to try and gain compliance with, especially with those who are over the threshold. And we offer these We Compost Food Scraps stickers so that they can advertise to their customers really their sustainable business practices. So a couple of things just on Vermont's story. Before we ever had a ban, the state had been long encouraging organics recycling. We have given grants and supported conferences to talk about organics and composting and food scrap diversion, animal feed, and food donation and food rescue. We've had these uncomfortable sometimes conversations with multiple stakeholders, and actually set up rules and regulations to provide a path forward for composting in our solid waste laws and for digestion, so that there was a place for them to go to try and innovate in this space. So those are sort of the foundational building blocks that actually got a lot of this infrastructure and interest going long before we ever had the ban. We had 3 haulers in our most popular city already hauling food waste before the ban ever went into effect. And then lastly, we have the ban that really supports a policy that supports market development. And for us, I describe these as learning lessons because we're not at the end yet. So there's not the lessons learned. We're still learning. I can't say enough that you need to engage your stakeholders early and often. It's been invaluable to talk to them about their needs, about their challenges, and to try and address them. As any state, you need to ensure a level playing field, provide a path forward for these facilities where this stuff can go and be managed safely and effectively. You really need to pay attention to markets because they matter so much in anything, as we know with recycling, and enforcing carefully. This is big change. We take it very seriously and we're not rushing in. We spend a lot of time on outreach and education on the front end. And then use what funding you might have to incentivize the greatest need. We have not had a lot of funding for this. We've had very small amounts, but we've provided small grants where we could. And then finally, just listen and constantly adapt. So just a final plug for these symbols. Use them again, and contact me if you'd like to get access to them. You can visit our VT Recycles website, which is currently on our recycling page because we just did an initiative there. You can also search online in your browser for Universal Recycling Vermont, and you'll get our web pages every time. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. We have a lot of questions in running a bit short of time, so I just want to go through one. Is the map. How often do you update the map? And thank you for highlighting EPA's map, which is national. For those of you on the phone, you can get a good start using that. So how often do you update?
We were hoping to do it annually. We really haven't kept up with that. It's been kind of a task that's much more Herculean than we thought. There's 6,000 generators in that map, and a lot of errors made us sort of pull back our expectations. We are working on an update currently. So I think, roughly every 2 years is probably more, 2 to 3 years is probably more likely.
Great. And a quick question, how many on your staff to help you with this?
We have a team of about, plus me is 5.
Perfect. All right, well, thank you for that, and we'll have some others if we get to it. John, sorry for cutting you a little short, but we'd like you to start and tell us about the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and your progress.
Okay, can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks very much, Chris. I will try to be brief. I think probably any of us could probably have filled a whole hour talking about this, so there's a lot to say. I'm going to kind of try to be brief in what I'm saying, and not speak a lot about the ban and what we've done along the way, but focus more on some of the results we've seen. But just for a quick overview, like Vermont and like Metro, we were working on these issues for a long time before we began to move forward with a organics waste ban. Really for decades, we rolled out our first comprehensive, what we called an organics action plan, in February of 2012, and that was intended to lay out a really comprehensive approach for how we were going to try to reduce food waste in Massachusetts. One of the elements of that organics action plan was our commercial organics ban. And that ban took effect in October of 2014. It's focused on businesses and institutions that dispose of 1 ton or more of food material per week. So part of this overall strategy is building our infrastructure, focusing on the largest sources first. So in our 2010 Solid Waste Master Plan, we set a goal for 2020, which was to divert an additional 350,000 tons of food material from disposal on an annual basis. That was building off a baseline of 100,000 tons diversion that we had estimated for 2008. That was our baseline, so that would give us total food waste diversion of about 450,000 tons on an annual basis. As of 2017, which is the most recent data we have so far, our total diversion was at 280,000 tons, so that's relative to the 450,000 ton goal, or our increase was 180,000 tons, that's relative to the 350,000 ton goal. I'll talk a little bit more about this. I am pretty optimistic we will meet that 2020 goal. I'll talk a little bit more about why in a moment. So from 2016 to 2017, we've seen our food waste diversion grow by 5%. This is a breakdown of the overall diversion in 2017. It's still, compost is still where most of our material goes, but that's rapidly changing, and we have more and more going to anaerobic digestion. And I think it won't be long before this anaerobic digestion number is greater than the compost number. We've seen a lot of growth in anaerobic digestion capacity. We also do track what goes through food donation, either through a food bank or a food rescue organization. We have 2 other facilities that process about 13,000 tons a year, which is going into wastewater. We have reported diversion to animal feed operations of about 1,700 tons, but we think that's vastly underestimated. Since this data came out, I had a phone conversation with one farm who wasn't reporting to me per se, but just in the course of the conversation suggested they were taking about 13,000 tons a year, and that's not anywhere in these numbers. So we think the food to animal feed is pretty big, and it's just not here, but we just don't have a good basis for estimating it. This also doesn't include on-site systems for things like garbage disposals and other similar systems that we estimate are at least 50,000 tons annually. So I wanted to speak a little bit more about donation. As the previous slide showed, we have reported to us about 26,000 tons of food material going through various donation programs. That's, I think, an accurate number, with just the caveat that these programs don't think in terms of tons. They think in terms of food, in terms of meals and things like that. But we think it's a relatively good estimate of the amount of material that's going through there. The food bank operations have really been steady state for a long time. We haven't seen a lot of growth on those in the wake of our ban, but we have seen a growth in food rescue organizations that collect fresh and perishable foods and trying to deliver those food products and meals to places like shelters on the same day. And that growth has been showing a steady increase, and it was up 14% from 2016 to 2017, and that's been a continuing trend. So we do think that's going to continue to increase. The other thing that's very important for the capacity is the collection infrastructure. Of course, we look at the processing capacity, and that's important, but we also know that we need haulers to invest in the collection systems and to service the customers who are looking for food waste collection. And that's another area where we've seen steady year-over-year growth since the ban took effect in 2014. You can see we're at a significant number to begin with, but that's gone up significantly since then, up 70% over this 4-year period, with a growth of about 950 customers. Just for perspective, we've estimated in the neighborhood of 1,700 entities generate enough food waste to be subject to our ban. So this includes entities subject to the ban as well as other smaller food waste generators. I also think it's important to note that as important as collection service is, and it's critical, we know that collection service alone doesn't necessarily ensure compliance. And our most obvious example of that is cardboard, which is a readily, easily recyclable material. It's been banned since 1990, and we see in the trash in large quantities every day. So by no means do we think we're done, but we think we're off to a great start with getting all these businesses with programs set up to separate food material from going into the trash. As far as our infrastructure to take the material, we have about 45 sites that we're aware of that are taking food material that want to be listed as taking food material. Some others prefer to take it on a limited basis under the radar. We don't list those. So we list the sites just that are seeking food material. We estimate that our compost capacity is pretty well utilized, around 150,000 tons per year. The anaerobic digestion capacity, however, there's quite a bit of capacity available now, and this is growing rapidly. So ultimately, in a couple of years, we think we'll be at about 600,000 tons of capacity on an annual basis. We already have 400,000 tons of capacity that's permitted and operational. That's capacity for food material. And then we have, some additional amounts that are either under construction or still going through permitting. And one other important piece for us is deep packaging operations. We have 7 that we list that are currently accepting food material for deep packaging to some degree, and then 2 more that are under development and moving forward. This has proven to be very important to getting both packaged food material to either compost or anaerobic digestion facilities, or in some cases maybe managing some streams like front of the house streams that need some pre-processing and screening before they go into a compost operation or anaerobic digester. So this is also an important part of our capacity. We did a couple of years ago, we had a company, ICF International, conduct an economic impact analysis for us about the ban and the activities associated with the ban, and we were pretty excited about what that showed. So that showed about 900 jobs, either directly or indirectly supported by the ban, 500 of those direct. This was across hauling, compost and AD facilities that receive food material, and then food donation and rescue. That's not necessarily everything, but those were the sectors that they surveyed. And that showed both a rapid growth from 2010 to 2016, but then those entities were also projecting to continue to grow significantly by the end of 2017. As far as economic activity, this isn't huge in a big picture, but it's not insignificant either. So these operations added about $77 million of value to state gross domestic product by state, and generated about $175 million in economic activity. And I think maybe the single most exciting thing for me about these numbers in this data was that they were estimating in the neighborhood of $50 million in future planned facility and capital investments. Probably a lot of that going towards anaerobic digestion, but other growth as well. And that was pretty exciting to see that this infrastructure, that these businesses had plans to continue growing. We've done a lot over the years to support some of those investments through a variety of grant and loan programs. I'm not going to run through this in great detail, but just to briefly say that we have a recycling loan fund that's run under contract to Mass DEP. We've also run a recycling business development grant program that we started up a couple of years ago. Our sustainable materials recovery program is our grants for municipalities to cities and towns. And then in addition to what we do at Mass DEP, the Mass Clean Energy Center has also given quite a number of grants for facilities, anaerobic digestion facilities that are looking at taking food material as a feedstock. And our Department of Energy Resources also contributes towards this. Funding for anaerobic digestion loans has come through the Department of Energy Resources. So there has been some state resources put into this. We also have a really important program for us, our Recycling Works in Massachusetts program that provides statewide free technical assistance to businesses and institutions, both on food waste, but also any recycling or waste reduction issue. And more recently, we also started up a program to provide technical assistance and workshops for compost site operators. Again, I could talk about this a whole bunch more, but I'll leave it at that. You can, if you want to learn more, Google Recycling Works in Massachusetts, and you can read more about it and see the information they have. We have been going out and enforcing our waste ban to date, and I think this may already have changed slightly. We're doing more all the time. We've issued 39 of what we call notices of noncompliance and 2 penalties so far specifically for commercial organic material. The notice of noncompliance is the enforcement action we take for an initial violation, and then we would issue a penalty upon a repeat violation. And then we are expecting to do some more targeted outreach and compliance assistance to businesses we believe are likely subject to the ban to ensure that they're complying. So some of this will echo some of what Josh had said, some of what we've learned so far. It's really important for the ban to be part of a comprehensive strategy. Everyone asks us about the ban, and I always answer by talking about our organics action plan. It's a ban never stands alone, and it needs to be part of a comprehensive approach. It's really important to build this type of initiative incrementally over an extended period of time. Of course, it works best when the economics are favorable. our 1 ton per week threshold. We believe businesses above that threshold can typically comply cost effectively, either cost neutral or saving money. As Josh also said, some degree of flexibility is important and appropriate. However, we believe, with the right approach and right context, this can be a really powerful tool. And just one other kind of interesting trend I'll note is that we've seen a lot of cases where it's worked well for businesses to start so-called lower on the hierarchy. So start with separating food material for composting or anaerobic digestion or maybe animal feed, and then working back up the stream to look at options for donation and reduction. We found that that approach has worked well in a lot of businesses, even if it may seem counterintuitive as far as the hierarchy goes. We are moving forward with our next 10-year solid waste master plan now. We do expect food waste to continue to be a big focus there. In particular, we expect to be focusing more on smaller sources and what approach we want to take with those smaller sources and trying to get more of that food waste out of the trash. And I will stop there. There's my contact information and our website for more information about food waste in Massachusetts. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. And I had the pleasure of working with John in Mass DEP for probably 10 years prior to the ban. So I think that I'd like to reiterate the upfront work is so critical before a ban and still important. John, I just have one really quick question that I think we should just clarify for folks. Can you just tell me what a depackaging operation is?
Sure. So a depackaging operation, it's a facility that has equipment to take. It's really designed for packaged food materials. So if you have a load, these are often like trailer loads that maybe they spoil or they're subject to a recall, or for some reason the food can no longer be sold. The depackaging operation will take that material, all sorts of packaging, really anything except glass. So they'll take metal cans, plastic boxes, grind it all up, separate the packaging from the food material, and then the food material can, depending on the facility and the material, can either go to anaerobic digestion, compost, or animal feed, and potentially, depending on the packaging, some of the packaging can be recycled as well. And I have seen these run, and they run amazingly effectively, better than you would think at separating the material.
Great. We only have a minute or two left, so just a quick answer for all of you. Have you aligned with other municipal goals or other climate change goals, climate resiliency or greenhouse gas reductions? Has that been part of your scheme for food waste diversion? Holly, you want to go first?
Sure. Here in the plan, it's a materials management plan where we're really looking at the environmental impacts of all of the materials and as far as measurement, getting away from just tons. So absolutely, climate impacts and measuring those and reporting those are a big driver in this. And many of our partners, City of Portland and other partners, also have climate action plans that food is a priority material in recovering food.
Thank you, Holly. Josh?
Chris, can you ask that question again?
Are there any alignments with climate resiliency or greenhouse gas reduction within the state specifically?
Thank you. Yeah. In Vermont, yes. We actually have a climate change website, or like a dashboard, and on there is a waste tab that explains how, from a restaurant to a resident, how you can take climate actions, and it highlights composting as one of those. Really, this is the pun intended low-hanging fruit. It's much easier to compost for many people than to change their commute or buy the next more efficient car, something like that. So we've seen a good synergy there. I continue to watch a lot of Oregon DEQ's and the Western Climate Alliance webinars on this topic, and always fascinated by what they come up with on the production side of climate change. But anyway.
John, we'll wrap up with you.
Okay. Yes, I think to a degree we certainly talk about greenhouse gas reduction being one of the multiple benefits to diverting food material from disposal. So we certainly do recognize that in that context and talk about it. As far as like a practical or sort of effective alignment, there's not like a direct sort of programmatic link or impact, but just that we recognize the value from a greenhouse gas reduction perspective.
Great. Well, with that, we've reached the 2 o'clock hour, and I'd like to thank all our speakers for sharing your knowledge. I know we could have talked a lot more about the subtleties of each of your programs and the successes. Finally, we'd like to thank you for joining us for this month's SMM Web Academy, and hope you continue to join us. The program's designed to you, so please complete our evaluation. Again, please complete our evaluation, a beg there, to give us feedback on how we can meet your needs. We'll post the webinar audio in about 2 weeks, and we invite you to join us for next month's March 14th webinar, also focusing on preventing food waste upstream, a source reduction approach, which is part 3 in a series we've been running. Thank you, and look for an email next week for registration details. This concludes today's session. Thank you again.